I still remember the exact moment my wife looked at me and said, "Daniel, you are a good man, but you are not the kind of man someone builds a future with." Those words were not shouted. They were not spoken out of anger. They were said calmly, almost like she was giving me advice. And somehow, that made them hurt even more. My name is Daniel Parker. I am 41 years old, and for most of my life, I believe that the strongest things were built quietly. I never needed people to know every achievement, every decision, or every risk I had taken. I always believed that the value of a person was not measured by how many people recognized their name. But that night, sitting across from my wife in the home we had built together, I realized something painful. The person who knew me the longest no longer saw me clearly. Emily and I did not start with luxury or success. We started with ordinary dreams. We lived in a small apartment where the kitchen was barely big enough for two people to cook together. We counted expenses, planned carefully, and celebrated small victories that other people would never notice. Those were the years when Emily and I believed we were building something meaningful together. She was ambitious, intelligent, and determined. I admired that about her. I was the person who listened to her ideas, supported her decisions, and reminded her that she was capable of achieving more than she imagined. When her career began to grow, I was genuinely proud of her. I watched her move from one opportunity to the next, taking on more responsibility and earning the respect of people around her. But somewhere along the way, success changed the way she looked at our lives. The world around her became filled with executives, investors, and people who measured achievement by titles and public recognition. I remained the same person. I still preferred quiet mornings, simple conversations, and a life away from unnecessary attention. To Emily, that started to look like a lack of ambition. She saw my silence as hesitation. She saw my privacy as uncertainty. She saw my choice to stay out of the spotlight as proof that I was not moving forward. What she never understood was that I had never stopped building. I had simply chosen a different path. I had spent years making careful decisions, creating opportunities, and investing in things that did not require my name to appear everywhere. I did not hide my life because I was ashamed of it. I kept it private because I wanted the people around me to value who I was before they knew what I had accomplished. But Emily had reached a point where she believed she understood my entire story. That night, she looked at me with a mixture of concern and disappointment. "I just want you to be realistic," she said. "You cannot keep waiting for something to happen." I listened quietly. I could have explained everything. I could have told her about the companies I had helped grow, the decisions I had made, and the future I had already helped create. But I did not, because there was one question I needed answered more than anything else. If she never knew my achievements, would she still believe I was enough? I did not know the answer yet, but I knew one thing. The future she thought I could never build had already been created. She just had no idea she was standing right beside it. After that conversation with Emily, I woke up the next morning feeling like something had shifted, not because my life had suddenly changed, but because I finally accepted something I had been avoiding for a long time. Sometimes the hardest thing to admit is not that someone else misunderstood you. It is that you allowed them to keep misunderstanding you. I walked into the kitchen of our Chicago home, made my coffee, and looked around at the place where Emily and I had spent years creating memories. Every corner reminded me of a different version of us. The early mornings before work, the weekends when we talked about our dreams, the moments when we had nothing but still felt like we had everything. Back then, Emily never questioned whether I was enough. She believed in me before there was anything to prove. That was one of the reasons I fell in love with her. She saw potential in me when I was still figuring things out. But success has a strange way of changing what people notice. As Emily moved higher in her career, her world became filled with people who carried impressive titles and impressive stories. She attended meetings with executives, traveled for business conferences, and built relationships with leaders across the industry. I was proud of her every step of the way. I never wanted her success to become smaller just because my path looked different. But slowly, I started noticing the small changes. Conversations that used to be about our dreams became conversations about other people's achievements. Questions about my ideas became questions about my plans. The woman who once asked what I wanted to build began asking why I was not building faster. I understood where it came from. Emily was surrounded by constant competition. In her world, everyone was trying to move ahead, and standing still was considered failure. What she did not understand was that progress does not always look the same for everyone. Some people build loudly. Others build quietly. Some people chase recognition. Others focus on creating something that lasts. I had always been the second type. Years earlier, when I first started making investments, I learned that patience was often more valuable than attention. I watched markets carefully, studied companies, and made decisions based on long-term vision. I never cared about having my name on every article or appearing at every event. I cared about results. Over time, those decisions created opportunities most people never saw. But I kept that part of my life separate. Not because I wanted to hide from Emily, but because I wanted our relationship to be built on something real. I wanted her to choose me because of my character, not because of what I could provide. That afternoon, I received a call from Marcus Reed, an old business associate I had worked with for years. His voice was professional, but I could tell the conversation was important. "Daniel, we need to talk about the future of the company," he said. I listened carefully as he explained that several major decisions were approaching. The kind of decisions that could shape the direction of an entire organization. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a moment. I thought about Emily's words from the night before. She believed I was waiting for my future to begin. She had no idea that I had already spent years building it. And soon, the same corporate world she admired would learn something she never expected. The quiet husband she underestimated was connected to the future of everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The days after that phone call from Marcus Reed were filled with quiet preparation. I did not rush. I did not make sudden moves. I had spent my entire career understanding that the most important decisions are rarely made in moments of excitement. They are made when everything is calm, when emotions are controlled, and when people are willing to look beyond what is obvious. I arrived at my office early the next morning, before most of the city had started its day. My office was not the kind of place people expected when they heard about successful investors. There were no expensive decorations or walls covered with awards. It was simple, organized, and designed for one purpose: making thoughtful decisions. I sat at my desk and reviewed the documents Marcus had sent me. The company's situation was more complicated than I initially expected. They had strong employees, valuable products, and talented leadership, but they were approaching a moment where one wrong decision could change everything. I knew the company well. I had followed its growth for years. What most people did not know was that I had been involved long before my name ever appeared in any official conversation. I had invested early because I believed in the people behind the business. I believed in their vision. I believed they were building something that could last. That was always how I approached business. I never invested in numbers alone. Behind every company were people, families, and employees who depended on the decisions made at the top. Later that afternoon, I met with Marcus at a private restaurant near downtown Chicago. We sat at a quiet table away from the busy crowd. Marcus looked at me and smiled. "You know what is interesting, Daniel? Most people would have told the world about what they built. You spent years making sure almost nobody knew." I smiled because he understood something that few people did. I was never trying to impress anyone. When Emily and I got married, I wanted our home to be a place where we could escape the pressure of the outside world. I did not want every conversation to be about money, status, or success. I wanted to be a husband first. That was the part that hurt the most about Emily's words. She did not just question my career. She questioned the one role I valued more than any title I could ever earn. I thought about the years when I would come home after long days and listen to her talk about her goals. I remembered how excited she was when she received her first major promotion. I remembered telling her that she deserved every opportunity coming her way. I never felt threatened by her success. I wanted her to succeed. But somewhere along the way, she started believing that my quiet approach meant I had stopped growing. After my meeting with Marcus, I returned home later than usual. Emily was sitting at the kitchen counter, looking through emails from work. She looked up and smiled politely. "Long day?" she asked. "A productive one," I replied. She nodded and returned to her screen. She had no idea that the company she worked for was entering one of the most important periods in its history. She had no idea that the decisions being discussed behind closed doors involved someone sitting only a few feet away from her. And she definitely did not know that the man she thought was waiting for his opportunity had already become one of the people responsible for creating it. The following week, I noticed something unusual happening around Emily's company. Not because anyone had told me directly, but because I had spent enough years in business to recognize the signs of a major transition. The conversations became more careful. The meetings became more frequent. People who were usually confident started asking more questions before making decisions. Change was coming, and everyone could feel it. I watched from a distance because that was always how I operated. I believed good leadership was not about making sure everyone knew your name. It was about making sure the right decisions were made at the right time. Emily, meanwhile, was completely focused on her career. She had been selected to help prepare for a major presentation that could influence the company's next stage of growth. She was excited, and I could see why. This was the type of opportunity she had worked toward for years. One evening, she came home carrying a folder filled with notes and documents. She placed it on the kitchen counter and started explaining the project. I listened carefully, just like I always had. She talked about the company's challenges, the pressure from investors, and the importance of finding the right strategy. As she spoke, I realized something. Emily was describing a situation that I already understood from a completely different perspective. She was looking at the company from the inside. I was looking at it from the foundation. But I did not interrupt her. I did not reveal what I knew. Instead, I asked questions and let her share her thoughts. Do you think the company has the right people making the decisions? I asked. She paused for a moment. I think we have talented people, but sometimes the biggest decisions are made by people who are too far away from the daily reality. I smiled slightly because I understood exactly what she meant. She did not realize how close she was to the truth. A few days later, I received a call from Marcus. His tone was more serious than before. Daniel, the board has scheduled a meeting. They want to discuss the future direction of the company. I knew this moment was approaching. The information I had kept private for years was about to become impossible to ignore. The meeting was scheduled at the company headquarters in downtown Chicago. When I arrived, I walked through the same building Emily entered every day. The same lobby, the same elevators, the same employees moving quickly between meetings. But this time, I was not there as someone connected to Emily. I was there because my decisions mattered. Inside the conference room, several executives were already waiting. At the center of the table sat Victor Reynolds, the company's CEO. He was a respected leader with decades of experience. He greeted me professionally, but I could tell he was curious. He knew my name, but he did not fully understand my role. The meeting began with financial reports, growth projections, and discussions about the company's future. I listened carefully as everyone shared their concerns. Then Victor looked across the table and said, Mr. Parker, we understand that you have been closely connected to this company for some time. We would like to hear your perspective. For years, I had stayed in the background. For years, I allowed people to see only a small part of who I was. But sitting there in that room, I realized something important. The truth was no longer something I could keep separate from my life. And soon, Emily would discover that the person she believed was standing still had been quietly shaping the path ahead all along. The meeting room became quieter as everyone waited for my response. Around the table were executives who had spent years building the company, people who were used to making important decisions and seeing immediate reactions. But I had learned a long time ago that the most valuable person in a room was not always the one speaking the most. Sometimes it was the person listening carefully before making a decision that could affect thousands of people. Victor Reynolds looked at me with a serious but respectful expression. Mr. Parker, we have reviewed the situation from every angle. We believe the company has potential, but the next step requires someone who understands both opportunity and risk. I looked at the documents in front of me. The numbers were clear. The company had strong foundations, but it needed a different direction to reach the future everyone believed was possible. I asked questions about employees, customers, long-term goals, and the company culture. Some people in the room expected me to focus only on financial returns, but that was never how I approached business. A company was not just a collection of numbers on a report. It was built by people who trusted leadership to make responsible choices. After several hours of discussion, the board members began to understand why Marcus had asked me to be involved. I was not there because I wanted control. I was there because I cared about what the company could become. Before the meeting ended, Victor leaned back in his chair and said something that stayed with me. You know, Daniel, what surprises me is that someone with your level of influence has remained completely unknown to most people here. I smiled slightly. Sometimes staying unknown allows you to see things more clearly. When I left the building that evening, I received a message from Emily. She asked if I wanted to have dinner. It was unusual, because recently our conversations had become shorter and more distant. I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant near the lake, a place we used to visit when we were younger. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Work, the city, old memories. Then Emily looked at me and said, "Something has been different about you lately." I asked what she meant. She paused before answering. "I do not know. You seem more confident, more certain." I looked at her for a moment. The truth was that I had not changed. I was still the same person who had supported her dreams, the same person who preferred a quiet life, the same person who did not need attention. The only difference was that circumstances had finally created a moment where people could see what had always been there. "Maybe I am just more comfortable being myself," I said. She looked thoughtful, but she did not ask further questions. Not yet. The next morning, the company scheduled another meeting. This one was different. The board wanted to finalize the future strategy and officially introduce the key people involved in the decision. Emily was expected to attend because of her role within the company. She had no idea that the meeting would change the way she saw everything. She had no idea that the quiet husband she believed was still searching for his place had already been sitting at the table where the future was being decided. The next morning, I arrived at the company headquarters earlier than scheduled. The building stood in the center of downtown Chicago, surrounded by glass towers and the constant movement of people chasing their own goals. For years, I had walked through places like this without anyone knowing who I was. I had always preferred it that way. I believed that influence did not come from being recognized. It came from making decisions that created something meaningful. But that day was different. The truth that I had kept private for so long was about to become impossible to ignore. Inside the conference room, executives gathered around the long table. Victor Reynolds sat at the front, reviewing the final documents before the meeting began. Marcus was there as well, along with several members of the leadership team. Then Emily walked in. She looked focused, professional, and completely unaware of what was about to happen. She greeted the executives, placed her notes on the table, and sat down. When she saw me sitting among the decision makers, she paused for a moment. Her expression showed confusion. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" she asked quietly. Before I could answer, Victor looked toward the room and began the presentation. He explained the company's current situation, the opportunities ahead, and the importance of having the right partners guiding the next stage of growth. Then he turned toward me. "I would like to introduce Daniel Parker, one of the key individuals who has supported this company's development from the beginning." The room became silent. Emily looked at me, waiting for an explanation. Victor continued. "For years, Mr. Parker has been involved behind the scenes. His investment decisions and strategic guidance have played a major role in where this company stands today." I watched Emily process those words one by one. She was not angry. She was not embarrassed. She was simply trying to understand how the person she thought she knew so well could also be someone she never truly saw. Victor then explained my position within the company structure. I was not an employee seeking recognition. I was not someone hoping for an opportunity. I was one of the people responsible for helping shape the company's future direction. The same company where Emily had built her career. The same company she believed represented the highest level of success. After the presentation ended, several executives approached me with questions and appreciation. They spoke about the years of decisions, patience, and long-term thinking that had helped the company grow. I answered each question calmly, just as I always had. I did not feel the need to remind anyone of my achievements. The facts were already there. When the room finally cleared, Emily remained seated. She looked at the documents in front of her, then back at me. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked. I sat across from her and thought carefully before answering. "Because I never wanted you to stay with me because of what I built." She looked away for a moment. "I thought you were lost," she said softly. "I thought you were someone who had stopped trying." I nodded because I understood why she felt that way. "I know," I replied. "But you were measuring my life by what you could see." That was the moment everything changed. Not because she discovered my success, but because she finally realized she had been looking at me without truly seeing me. After the meeting ended, I stayed in the conference room for a few minutes, looking out at the Chicago skyline through the large glass windows. The city looked the same as it always had. People were walking between buildings, cars were moving through busy streets, and thousands of stories were unfolding at the same time. But my own story had reached a moment I knew was coming. For years, I had protected the boundary between my personal life and my professional life. I wanted to be known as Daniel, the husband, the friend, the person who listened and supported the people around him. I never wanted to become a title or a number. But now that boundary had disappeared. Emily and I drove home in silence that evening. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence where two people are trying to understand everything that has changed. When we arrived home, Emily placed her keys on the counter and stood there for a moment. The house felt different, even though nothing had physically changed. The same furniture was there. The same pictures were on the walls. The same memories existed in every room. But the way we looked at each other had changed. "Daniel," she finally said, "I do not know what to say." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had planned our future years earlier. "You do not have to say anything right now," I replied. She looked at me with a mixture of regret and confusion. "I spent years thinking you were not moving forward. I thought you were comfortable doing nothing." I took a moment before answering. "I was always moving forward, Emily. It just did not look like what you expected." That sentence stayed between us. Because it was the truth. People often assume progress has a certain appearance. They expect success to be visible. They expect achievements to come with recognition, attention, and proof. But some of the most important things in life are built quietly. Emily walked toward the window and looked outside. "Why did you never tell me about the company?" she asked. "Because I wanted our relationship to be real," I said. "I wanted to know that the person beside me cared about Daniel Parker, not what Daniel Parker owned or controlled." She looked down, and I could tell she was thinking about every moment when she had judged me by what she saw on the surface. The conversations where she questioned my ambition. The times she compared our lives to other couples. The moments when she believed my quiet nature meant I lacked purpose. "I think I stopped seeing you," she said softly. I did not respond immediately because I knew that sentence required honesty from both of us. "Maybe we both stopped seeing each other," I said. That was the hardest part to accept. It was not about one person being completely right and the other being completely wrong. Relationships are built by two people, and sometimes both people lose their way. Over the next few weeks, Emily started seeing my world differently. She watched how I approached business decisions. She saw that the same patience she once considered a weakness was actually one of my greatest strengths. She noticed that I treated people with respect regardless of their position. The executives at her company respected me not because of my ownership, but because of the way I made decisions. Slowly, Emily began understanding something important. She had spent years searching for someone who could help her build a future, while overlooking the person who had already been building one beside her. The weeks that followed were different from anything Emily and I had experienced before. Not because of the company, the meetings, or the changes happening around us, but because we finally started having conversations we should have had years earlier. For a long time, we had both been speaking without truly listening. Emily was focused on building a successful career, and I was focused on building a stable life. We were both moving forward, but somehow we had stopped walking in the same direction. One evening, we sat together in our living room after dinner. There were no phones between us, no work emails, and no distractions. Just two people trying to understand how they had become distant while living under the same roof. "I keep thinking about all the times I judged you," Emily said. "I thought I understood your life, but I was only looking at what was visible." I listened quietly. I knew that recognizing a mistake was not easy, especially for someone who had spent years believing they were right. "I did not need you to know about the company," I told her. "I needed you to believe in me, even when you thought there was nothing impressive to see." She nodded slowly. "That is the part one regret the most. I thought success was something you had to show people. I forgot that some people create things without needing everyone to notice." Her words meant something because they showed she was beginning to understand the difference between appearance and reality. Over time, Emily started seeing the qualities she had overlooked. She noticed how I approached problems with patience instead of panic. She noticed how employees and business partners respected me because I treated them like people, not just numbers on a report. She noticed that leadership was not about being the loudest person in the room. It was about making decisions responsibly when nobody was watching. At the company, things continued moving forward. The strategy changes we introduced began creating positive results. Victor Reynolds remained the CEO, and our partnership became stronger because we shared the same goal, building something sustainable. One afternoon, Victor and I sat in his office discussing the future. He looked at me and said, "You know, Daniel, The reason people trust you is not because of your position. It is because you never act like you need one. I appreciated those words because they reflected everything I believed about success. Titles could change. Numbers could change. Public attention could disappear. But character stayed with you. Emily also began changing the way she viewed her own success. She realized that the same qualities she admired in other leaders had been present in me all along. She had simply been looking for them in everyone else. One weekend, we visited the small neighborhood where we lived when we first started our journey together. We walked past the old apartment building and remembered the years when we had very little but still felt hopeful. Emily smiled and said, "We were happy before we had anything to prove." I looked at her and realized that was the lesson we both needed. Success was never the problem. The problem was allowing success to change what we valued. I did not want Emily to admire me because of what I owned or what decisions I could make. I wanted her to see the same person she believed in when we had nothing. And for the first time in years, I felt like she was finally seeing me again. Months passed, and when I looked back at everything that had happened, I realized the biggest transformation was not the moment people discovered my role in the company. It was not the meetings, the recognition, or the change in how others viewed me. The most important change happened quietly, inside the relationship that mattered most. Emily and I had finally learned how to see each other again. Life became simpler in many ways. We still had busy schedules, business responsibilities, and challenges like any other couple. But the difference was that we no longer faced those challenges as two separate people. We faced them together. One evening, we sat outside our home in Chicago, watching the sunset over the neighborhood where we had built our life. The same place where years earlier we dreamed about a future we could barely imagine. Emily looked at me and smiled. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had told me everything from the beginning?" I thought about the question carefully. "Sometimes," I answered, "but I think the journey taught us something we needed to learn." She nodded. She understood what I meant. If I had revealed everything years earlier, she might have respected my achievements, but I would never have known whether she respected me. That was the question I needed answered. Not whether someone would admire what I built, but whether they would value the person who built it. My relationship with the company continued to grow as well. Victor remained a trusted partner, and together we focused on creating long-term success rather than chasing short-term attention. The company expanded, new opportunities appeared, and more people learned about the decisions that had shaped its future. But I never changed the way I approached leadership. I still listened before speaking. I still considered the people affected by every decision. I still believed that success was not about standing above others. It was about creating something that allowed others to move forward too. Emily also found a different perspective on her own career. She became a stronger leader because she stopped measuring herself only by achievements. She began understanding that the most successful people are not always the ones with the most impressive titles. They are the ones who know who they are when nobody is watching. Looking back, I do not blame Emily for the things she said. People make mistakes when they judge a story before knowing the full picture. I had done the same thing in different ways throughout my life. The important part was that we both chose to learn from it. The lesson was never about proving someone wrong. It was about understanding that every person carries a story that others cannot see. Some people show everything they build. Others protect it quietly until the right moment arrives. I was never waiting for my future to begin. I was building it every day, even when nobody noticed. And the greatest reward was not that the world finally recognized my value. The greatest reward was that the person beside me finally remembered why she believed in me in the first place.